Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We are going to be talking with you today about the FY 2027 appropriations process and specifically talking through the Alliance's recommendations for key HUD programs, including the homeless assistance grants, tenant-based rental assistance, and Section 202 supportive housing for the elderly. And in addition to that, we will be providing some tips for talking with your lawmakers, as well as general guidance around advocacy and all of those things in order to make sure our voices get heard on this topic. Next slide. All right, my name is Marcy Thompson. I'm the Vice President for Programs and Policy here at the National Alliance to End Homelessness. I'm joined today by Steve Berg, our Chief Policy Officer, Charles Williams, our Director of Congressional Affairs, and Tamina Chowdhury, our Director of Advocacy and Campaign Strategy. Next slide. All right, before we dive in, can you go back one? I'm sorry. Okay. Before we dive in, I want to just review a few housekeeping items. Sorry, you can actually go to the next one. The chat will be open, but with limited functionality. All participants will be able to reach out to the hosts, and we will be able to share information in the chat with you all. So pay attention to all of the various links and resources that we'll be sharing throughout the presentation. If you have questions during the webinar today, please use the Q&A function to submit those, and we will do our best to address those during the presentation, either in written responses or at the end when we get to a Q&A panel discussion. This webinar will be recorded. We know that's always a top question for folks. So yes, it will be recorded and will be available along with the PowerPoint slides and accompanying materials. Those will be sent out soon. Closed captions are enabled. And so if you need those, you can turn those on in your settings to see them. All right, next slide. So at the Alliance, we value diversity and welcome everyone to join our events. We also strive to create a safe and respectful environment for everyone. So we encourage interaction, but please do so with respect and notify me or other Alliance staff persons that are on the that are part of the hosts and panelists if you witness any abusive or discriminatory behavior. I'm now going to hand it over to Steve Berg, the Alliance's Chief Policy Officer, to talk through the FY27 federal appropriations process and give you a little bit of information on where things currently stand.
All right, thank you, Marcy, and thank you everyone for joining today. And I'm happy to say that the work the Alliance is able to do with help from people all over the country who are working on this issue has a big impact in Congress, and we're positive that that's going to happen again this year. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about the appropriations process, just to give people a little bit of a background on that, and then I'm going to talk about the administration's budget request in a minute. The appropriations process. Appropriations is the fancy word for government spending, and it's a specific kind of government spending that's determined by the Appropriations Committee. That's why it's called appropriations, I guess. There's other kinds of federal spending that are called mandatory spending that's got a whole different process. But basically all the HUD spending and all the other homelessness program spending is done through the appropriations process. The process technically, officially starts with the president's budget proposal. The president's budget proposal most years doesn't really have a lot of impact on the actual process. I'll talk about that in a minute. Um, but then the lawmakers in Congress create their own budget, really centering on the Appropriations Committee and the subcommittees in the Appropriations Committee. Um, the subcommittee, there's a subcommittee that deals with different agencies in the federal government. The THUD subcommittee, the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development subcommittee, deals with HUD programs. There's a separate subcommittee that deals with uh, labor and HHS programs. We're mostly going to be talking about HUD on this webinar. So the THUD subcommittee, the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development subcommittee, will is right now already working on writing a bill for fiscal year 27. There's a House committee and a Senate committee, and they're sort of working separately on their bills. They work with the committee leadership and with the full House or full Senate leadership to have an idea of the overall amount of spending that the THUD subcommittee will be allowed to do. That, on paper, if you read the laws governing this, you would think, well, they set those overall amounts first, and then they proceed to make individual appropriations for different programs. But it's really more of a give and take process. The subcommittee will tell leadership how much they think they need as they go through the process. As the year goes on, that amount will be changed a little bit, but they'll come up with a final bill. Then the House and Senate will get together and resolve whatever differences exist between the House and Senate bill. And then the bill finally goes to the president for the president's signature. President has the power to veto the bill, but very, very, very seldom does the president veto an appropriations bill because there's so much in there that they don't want to mess it up. Okay, so that's enough for that. Next slide, please. So I talked about the president's budget request. The president, as people know, put out a budget request. It has many things in it that are very much opposed by the alliance. It's got big reductions in a lot of HUD programs. The homeless programs are, as was the case with the president's budget last year, the homeless programs are turned into a block grant and cut substantially. There are other cuts in other programs we care about. So I would say that the alliance has already put out material critiquing the president's budget. As I said, the Appropriations Committee, takes the president's budget as a suggestion, and it's a suggestion that they don't really take. I don't want to say they don't take it seriously, but they strongly feel that it's Congress's job to decide these spending levels. The president makes these suggestions, and the appropriations committees can pay attention or not pay attention to the president's requests as they see fit. Last year, there were many bad things in the president's budget request on homelessness, and the Appropriations Committee didn't really enact any of them. They made their own decisions about what was going to be in there, and so we're hoping the same thing will happen this year. Next slide, please. So the main message on the president's budget is it's just a proposal. Congress doesn't have to adopt it. Congress shouldn't adopt it on the homeless programs. It makes the same mistakes it made last year. And I really think this last point is important. The alliance, and not just the Alliance South, but what people all over the country who work with us on homelessness programs in the states and cities represented by these members of Congress, they're the ones that Congress will really look to for expertise here. And they will consider our proposals and what we want quite seriously. So to talk about what we want, let me turn it back over to Marcy.
All right, I'm trying to get my, there we go. All right, thank you so much, Steve, for that. So Steve just spoke about the president's budget proposal uh, for uh, for HUD, but now I want to talk about the Alliance's recommendations for key HUD programs that are most critical to our efforts to respond to homelessness. There is a reason that Congress pays attention to what the Alliance recommends around these programs because they know that our recommendations are informed by both decades of experience and expertise across the Alliance's staff, but more importantly, by the needs of their constituents who we talk to on a regular basis. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking through all of our recommendations for this year. Next slide. As is the case in any year, our top priority here at the National Alliance to End Homelessness is to preserve and protect the Homeless Assistance Grants account, which includes both the Continuum of Care, or COC program, and the Emergency Solutions Grants program, or ESG program. The Alliance is urging Congress this year to provide an appropriation of $5.1 billion for the Homeless Assistance Grants account. This would be a total increase of $800 million from FY 2026. But let's dig in a little bit more of what this would actually mean. So for the Continuum of Care program specifically, the recommendation is $4.6 billion, which is a $600 million increase for that program. It's important to note that just under $400 million of that increase is really just to cover the renewal demand for the program. So that's to account for first-time renewal projects, fair market rent increases, as well as cost of living adjustments for frontline staff. So even though that 600 million may seem like a big increase, it really is primarily to sustain what is currently in your communities. Um, it leaves a little bit of room for the creation of new projects to meet community-specific needs. And while we urge Congress to ensure that the use of these funds should be determined locally, we are also asking Congress to prioritize youth, survivors of domestic violence, older adults, and people with complex behavioral health needs. For the Emergency Solutions Grants Program, the Alliance is recommending an increase of $210 million. This would be the most significant increase in funding for ESG in easily more than a decade. This increased funding would allow communities to better respond to unsheltered homelessness by helping communities move more people from the streets into emergency accommodations and directly into housing. The increase could also be used to ensure that emergency accommodations meet evolving needs. In particular, we know that in many communities, the shelters and other facilities that are there as part of their crisis response are very dated. And so having funds available to help modernize those spaces to allow them to better serve older adults and people with disabilities in particular feels important. Next slide. In addition to our overall funding recommendation for the Homeless Assistance Grants, the Alliance is also calling on Congress to include specific provisional language into the appropriations bill that would protect the integrity of the COC program and ensure stability for COCs. Specifically, we are urging Congress to include the following. Set Tier 1 for COCs to no less than 85% of a Continuum of Care's renewal demand or annual renewal demand. Equally permit the renewal of all program component types, including permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, really any component type. And the goal here is to prohibit HUD from implementing a cap on any component type within the COC program. We're also asking Congress to ensure that bonus funding, if available, is limited to the activities based on the statute. And the statutory language essentially says that any bonus or incentive should be on activities proven to be effective at reducing homelessness, and explicitly identifies permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing as meeting that requirement. The statute does allow the Secretary to use bonuses and incentives for other activities, but only if based on research and after a notice of comment period. So just wanting Congress to weigh in on that. And then finally, if all awards for fiscal year 2027 are not awarded and obligated before March 2028, then we are urging Congress to require HUD to non-competitively renew all projects expiring in that calendar year. And really that is just to try to prevent being in a situation where communities and COCs and grantees face long and unnecessary delays. And then the last piece is where we are outside of either COC or ESG and more kind of an overarching provision. In response to concerns that we have around data, we are also recommending that Congress include language that would limit HUD's ability to make changes to standard definitions and reporting requirements in order to preserve the integrity of data. Next slide. So we are also making recommendations around some other critical HUD programs in order to promote housing stability and reduce homelessness overall. So first up, the Alliance is calling for a total of $45.6 billion in FY 2027 funding for HUD's tenant-based rental assistance or TBRA account. This account covers several HUD rental assistance programs, including Housing Choice Vouchers, also known as Section 8, as well as HUD Veteran Affairs Supportive Housing, or HUD VASH. This amount for FY 2027 would be a $7.16 billion increase from FY 26. This would allow all current TBRA assistance to continue and would add new incremental vouchers to meet the increasing need as a result of the skyrocketing rate of rent and the severe shortage of affordable housing. The Alliance is also within that recommendation recommending that Congress allow for a portion of those new incremental vouchers be designated for use as emergency housing vouchers to ensure that all of the households who are still receiving assistance through that pandemic era program can remain housed through calendar year 2027. And then finally, new this year in terms of having a specific budget recommendation, the Alliance is also urging Congress to make a more significant investment in the supportive housing for the elderly program, otherwise referred to as Section 202. This is because, we know that older adult homelessness is rising at an alarming rate. We hear from communities about this all the time. We see it reflected in the data. And so we really think it's important for Congress to ensure that there is more targeted assistance available for our aging population. Specifically, the Alliance is calling on Congress to allocate $1.85 billion to the Section 202 program and direct HUD to use this increased funding in very specific ways. First, our recommendation is to provide $600 million to expand and modernize the program by providing that funding for capital advances as primary financing for approximately 2,000 homes and adjusting operating subsidy to the Section 8 platform. Also included in that increase would be expanding the service coordination component of the program which would be $265 million to renew existing grants and fund at least 100 different or additional service coordinators. And then finally, the last piece is we're calling on Congress to set aside do a $50 million set aside to serve extremely low income adults age 55 and older who are at risk of homelessness or who are experiencing homelessness. This is important because the standard age of eligibility for Section 202 is 62 and above. However, we know that adults age 55 and over are really the fastest growing group of people who are becoming homeless. So in order to ensure greater housing security, to address that insecurity sooner, rather than waiting until folks hit that age of 62, part of this set aside would be including language that would authorize HUD to waive the statutory age requirement so that it can in fact be lowered to 55. So I'm now going to hand it over to our new Director of Congressional Affairs. He's on day 8 or 10, I believe. So welcome, Charles, our Director of Congressional Affairs, who's going to talk through some tips for speaking with your congressional members about these recommendations.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marcy. So, all right, you now know what the Alliance needs, what we all need, and why it matters. My job for the next few minutes is to make sure you leave this webinar knowing exactly how to get it. Now, I'm in congressional offices constantly, building relationships and making asks to move things forward. And I'll be honest with you, there's a stark difference between advocacy that lands and advocacy that just fills someone's calendar. So today, I want to give you the version that works. Now, the Alliance's goal, our goal, when we engage Congress is threefold. Number one, we want to get their attention. We want to earn enough trust so that they take our cause. And third, we want to drive actual action. And so everything I'm about to say today is in service of those three things. So let's start with the actions to take before you even walk through the door. Before you set foot in a meeting, the first step is to do your homework. And I know a lot of you probably heard that growing up, so it brings back good or bad memories, but you do your homework. You want to know who your member is, not just their name, but their committee assignments, who their key staffers are, who has influence in that office, and what other organizations or stakeholders they actually listen to, because in most cases, you're going to be meeting with staffers and not the member. But those staff members shape their boss's position more than most people realize. Equally important is to localize everything before you show up. Your member represents a district or a state, and frankly, that's where their head is back at home. And so while national statistics are important, national statistics alone don't move people. So what moves people? Well, specifics. Specifics move people in Congress. Specifics like, how many individuals are experiencing homelessness in their district right now? That's critical. How many units of permanent supportive housing does their state have at risk? What does their local continuum of care receive in federal funding? All these things are critical. And here at the Alliance, we can help you get that data and use it. And so once you've done the work to prepare, I want to talk about how you make the most of the time you earn, and that's during the meeting. Okay, you made it into the room, but the key to executing in the meeting itself is by leading with an ask. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen advocates, very, very good advocates, great advocates with compelling stories, walk into a meeting, spend 20 minutes on everything that's wrong, and never actually say what they want the office to do. When you walk into these offices, staff are typically managing dozens of issues, sometimes more. And if you don't hand them a clear, specific request, you're going to have a nice conversation and pretty much nothing else. And so I want to give you an example of what a specific ask sounds like. And so you walk into the office and a specific ask would sound like this. We are asking your office to support $5.1 billion for HUD's Homeless Assistance Grant in fiscal year 2027 Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Appropriation Bill. And just like that, you did it. That's the ask, but you lead with it. You come back to it during the meeting, and you also close with it. When you're making that ask, though, you want to be credible. You want to walk into an office with evidence and results. When you anchor your ask in data and demonstrated results, not just moral urgency, which is extremely important, two things happen. First, staff who want to help have something concrete to take back to their boss. And second, you become harder to dismiss. So we need to do this because it's right. And a lot of offices can be argued. However, on the flip side, here's what the research shows. Here's what it costs not to act. And here's what our community gets back. It's a lot more difficult to wave away. And so I do want to say and be clear, you don't have to soften your values to be strategic. Alliance isn't going to soften our values, but we're going to be strategic and give folks in Congress the tools they need to say yes. So it's all about making it hard for them to say no. Now, speaking of strategy, when engaging with Congress, you want to be timely, especially with appropriation, because appropriation decisions happen at specific moments. You have subcommittee markups and floor votes and conference negotiations, very confusing at times. So reaching a congressional office the week before a markup is probably worth 10 times as the same email sent at random. And so, of course, the Alliance will flag those moments for you. And when we say it's go time, you'll know for sure that it's go time. Now, let's talk about before you leave the meeting. Before you leave any meeting, you want to close on something concrete. Don't accept, we'll look into it. We want to ask for a specific action with a specific date. For example, can your office sign on to this letter of support to the Appropriations Committee by June 15th? Yes or no? And you give them a deadline. You also want to leave your contact information so staff can easily find you. Again, the easier you make it for them to say yes, the more often that's what you're going to hear. What happens in that room matters, but what you do next after engagement is what turns a meeting into congressional action. I'm going to talk about that briefly. When you wrap up a meeting and it went well, this is arguably one of the most important parts of the entire process. But this is also where a lot of great advocates drop the ball. The relationship does not end when you walk out of that door. It actually starts there. And so we should be thinking about what we can offer these offices moving forward after the meeting. Can you be a local resource on homelessness data in their district? Can you bring a member or their staff out for a site visit, a shelter, supporting housing development, a day center so they can see their work firsthand? These are the things that move the needle. Can you provide constituent stories or local media coverage that helps their communications team? After the meeting is the time to make yourself a partner. The offices that return our calls are the ones that we've actually been useful to and partner with. And when you follow up, which is so important, you don't just want to send a thank you and go quiet. You want to come back with something new each time. Come back with the data point. Come back with the news story in the district, or a personal account from someone in your community or even in your family. Each touch point is a chance to deepen the relationship and keep the ask in front of them as the appropriation process moves forward. So here's the bottom line. Congress responds to organized, persistent, credible advocacy from people they trust, like the Alliance. You are those people. You're the secret sauce. You have the relationships in your communities. You have the data. We'll help you with that as well. You have the stories. And we're here to give you the strategy and the backup to keep the issues we care about in the community at top of mind. So Tamina is going to build on this a bit and talk about how to mobilize a full campaign. And so with that, I want to hand it off to her. Tamina?
Thank you, Charles. This is a great segue to what I'm going to talk about today. It's a very simple but powerful idea, which is effective advocacy isn't episodic, it's continuous. If you want to influence outcomes on Capitol Hill, we need to think about beyond moments of urgency and instead think about a long-term strategic presence with our members of Congress. So let me walk you through 5 key ways we can do that. First is build relationships year-round. So Charles has talked about that day in the office of a member of Congress. That is part of the long-term strategy that you will pull together in your advocacy plan. So how do we build relations that are year-round? Too often, outreach to congressional offices happens when there is a need when there's a vote happening or there's a deadline, there's a crisis. But real influence comes from trust, and trust takes time. That means developing and maintaining relationships consistently, not just when we need them for something. We should be checking in regularly with staff, sharing our updates, offering ourselves as a resource, demonstrating that we are a credible, reliable partner. When offices recognize our names before we show up with an ask, we are already in a stronger position. The goal is to move from being occasional visitors to being trusted voices that they proactively turn to. The second point is engage locally in the district. So Charles is talking about in DC office, but some of the skills you can also apply when you meet them in district. So while Washington, D.C. is important, but a lot of the most meaningful engagement happens back home. District offices are where members of Congress and their staff connect directly with their constituents. In fact, those offices are created to serve constituents and community leaders, and that gives us a powerful opportunity to engage with them. We should prioritize in-district meetings, lobby days, and especially high-impact site visit that Charles also mentioned. Inviting staff and members to see our work firsthand, whether that's a program that you run, a facility, or people directly impacted, can make our message tangible and memorable in a way just a meeting in DC simply can't. Equally important, we need to build relationship with district staff, not just their legislative staff in Washington, D.C. District staff are often deeply influential. They brief the member, they shape their perceptions, and they flag issues that matter locally, which the member cares most about. When they understand our work and our value, they become internal advocates for us. Third, how do we increase our outreach during appropriations? While our engagement should be year-round, there are key windows where intensity matters. And appropriation season is one of the biggest period for that. During this period, there's a tremendous volume of decision making happening, often at a very fast pace. To break through, we need a steady drumbeat of outreach, particularly with DC-based staff. That means regular touch points, timely data, clear and concise messaging, and responsiveness. Consistency is critical here. One message delivered once can easily be lost, but a coordinated series of touches, whether that's through emails, meetings, follow-ups, meet again in district offices, keeps our priorities visible and reinforces our importance. Remember, the goal is not to overwhelm them, but to stay present and relevant throughout this process. Fourth, is how do we coordinate with fellow advocates? Now, advocacy is rarely most effective when we do it alone in isolation. We are stronger when we collaborate. That means actively sharing data, stories, talking points, and intelligence with peers and partners back home in communities. If one organization learns something about a member's priorities or concern, that insight shouldn't stay siloed, but should be shared collectively, should be shared with partners collectively and inform their strategy. Coordination also happens when we are consistent and sharing information with each other. When multiple advocates are reinforcing the same core message, it amplifies impact and reduces confusion for congressional offices. Instead of receiving fragmented or even conflicting inputs, staff hear a clear, unified perspective, which is the core principle of advocacy, is that be short, to the point, and be persuasive. Finally, join forces to strengthen the message. So we have talked with our partners in communities who work on homelessness, but we can also bring in other partners who are stakeholders in the policy decisions made by Congress. So beyond coordination, we should be thinking proactively about coalition building. Who else has a stake in this issue? Who brings complementary perspective or credibility? By identifying and convening other stakeholders, whether that's community organization, small businesses, law enforcement, faith-based organization, or local leaders, we can broaden the base of support and demonstrate that our ask isn't a narrow ask, but really widely shared by the community. Remember, a strong coalition sends a powerful signal, and that is this issue matters to multiple constituencies across different communities and sectors. That kind of alignment can make it much harder to ignore and much easier for members of Congress to champion. When we come together, we don't just add voices, we amplify the impact. Now, let me bring all this together. These 5 strategies reinforce one another and builds on what Charles had already shared with you. Remember, year-long relationship building creates trust. District engagement makes our work real and local. Appropriations outreach keeps us visible at key moments. Coordination ensures that we are consistent and efficient. And coalition building amplifies our collective voice. Taken together, they shift our approach from reactive to strategic, from transactional to relational. And ultimately, that's what successful advocacy requires. Long-term strategic planning. If there's one takeaway I would leave with you today, it is this. Our effectiveness depends less on what we say in a single moment and more on the strength and consistency of how we show up over time. When we invest in relationship, stay engaged, work together, and speak with unified voice, we position ourselves not just to be heard, but to make a lasting impact that impacts our community. Thank you. And with that, I will pass it to Marcy.
Oh, all right. So just what you see here is, I'm sorry, my camera's. So we just published an appropriations advocacy toolkit earlier this week. There will be, I think it's in the chat for you to access that. It has all of the materials that we have spoken about today that we've put in the chat. We encourage you to go there. We certainly encourage you to, if you're not already signed up for our advocacy alerts, I definitely want you to get signed up to find out about what our priorities are, when there are those moments that Tamina talked about, as well as the opportunities for training and other ways to get involved and engaged. So I'm going to ask my fellow panelists to come back on camera to respond or to just talk through a few questions. We don't have a ton of questions in the Q&A, but I have a couple of questions that I'd like to pose. And so the first one, Steve, is for you. If you could just maybe talk a little bit, we just heard Charles and Tamina talk about the need for the steady drumbeat to have these conversations and the importance of it. And I know for so many of folks that are in community working to end homelessness, that might feel really overwhelming. It might feel like another task to take on, right? Can you share a little bit about what's at risk? Like if we don't make this noise, if we don't vocalize these needs as a community, you know, what's at risk there?
Well, the number one thing is that's at risk is, of course, the funding for the programs, and then the attempts by the administration to change these programs and really pull them away from real cost-effective practices and toward things that we know through long history are not so cost-effective. So I mean, it is another task, but we feel like over the years people found it to be worthwhile. It when it's done the right way, well, all the things Tamina was talking about, it gets good results. I think the the homelessness issue is sort of known in Washington, D.C. as one that gets good results from the work we do with Congress.
Yeah.
And that's why, because people are doing all those things.
And I will add to that just what we've seen in the last 6 months around the FY 2025 COC program NOFO. That the ability to get Congress to include language in the final appropriations bill was the direct result of a collective and coordinated response from advocates across the country, and not just advocates that work day in and day out in homeless services, but other stakeholders from the community as well. And Tamina talked about that. Um, my next question is for Charles and Tamina, but maybe start with Charles. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of tailoring your message to the member and really specifically, you know, different lawmakers, some are supporters, some tend to maybe be more on less supportive of this cause. Can you talk a little bit about how to tailor your message depending on where your lawmaker sits?
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Marcy. That's a great question. I think it's one that comes up all the time, especially with such a politically charged environment we're in. It can sometimes feel hopeless. And I'm here to tell you that it's not, right? Um, just like with any relationship, you have to find the right touch points in order to build or cultivate said relationship. And when you're talking to lawmakers, again, it always comes back home, right? Localizing that message. They may not be concerned about something that's happening 1,000 miles across the country, but what's happening in their backyard means something, right? The ultimate goal, one of the goals for a lot of our lawmakers is to be reelected. They know that. And so when you walk into that office, that should be in the back of your mind and sometimes at top of your mind, right? Like these are the things that we want from you in order for you to get a vote from us. These are the things that we care about. This is the hill worth dying on. And sometimes you can walk with that type of pressure. There are also other creative ways to get your members' attention. I mean, I'll be I'll be rich if I heard about if I had a nickel for every time I heard about a member signing on to a bill because they read an op-ed, right? Because they saw a rally in their community, right? I came from a faith-based organization. They heard about something at a church gathering, and so there are always ways to find these touch points with your members of Congress. I think the best way to go about finding those touch points is to work with us. Like, see if there are ways we can connect you to other organizations or partners that can put you in the right places in the right rooms to have those conversations. And then number two, just staying in touch with us so we can equip you with the points you need to walk in these offices. Again, I am not naive. I know some of your members are really, tough eggs to crack, but we have the tools to help you do that, whether they're Republican, Democrat, centrist, all across the ideological spectrum. We have the tools to help you with that. And Tamina, if you want to, kind of piggyback off that and talk a little bit about the advocacy grassroots piece or whatever you have in mind.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. So to build on what Charles says, we are here as a support. Every month, we do a training workshop based on different topics that you as an advocate will be applying as an advocate and as your strategy making your strategy. I think the one that's coming next month is on how to talk to GOP leaders and moderates. If you are concerned about your member of Congress more in the not supportive side, please join us. The other thing I would say is power mapping is so important. And please reach out to me. We also have a workshop on power mapping coming up. Building on what Charles said, it's really important to think about the whole landscape in the district within which the member of Congress is operating. There are folks that he listens to. It could be your governor, it could be state legislature, it could be your mayor, it could be, like Charles said, the church that he goes to. There are folks back home who he listens to, whose opinions he care about. So power mapping is how you find out those folks. And so it's really important to start thinking about What do my members of Congress think about, and what is the backstory? The work I need to do in the back end so I can meet him where he is.
Thank you for that. And I do want to just feel it feels important to just put this in here that we are a nonpartisan organization, and homelessness is not a partisan issue. It should not be a partisan issue. For decades, homelessness was well understood, and the homelessness programs were well supported by both aisles within Congress. And so I think to both Charles and Tina and Steve, it is not all lost. There's a lot of opportunity to have conversations. We have to sometimes find the right message and the right messenger to get that across. I want to do one more question, and Tamina, I'm going to put this to you. We often hear from folks that work directly in homeless services, either, around how busy they are, and they don't feel like they're able to engage in advocacy uh, to the fullest extent, or they're in positions where they feel uncomfortable, or they feel like they're restricted from being able to lobby their lawmakers directly. Can you talk about the different ways that people can be engaged in advocacy that people may not be thinking of to help get involved?
Yeah. So advocacy is not just when you talk to your members of Congress. There are other ways you can be an advocate. When you show up in a protest, you're advocating for an issue. When you're writing a poster, you're advocating for an issue. When you're donating to an organization and cause, you're advocating, right? So there are a whole list of ways you can advocate. One of the, I think, easiest way we try to try to get you to advocate is we prepare the content for you. If you're signed up for a list, you will receive talking points. We help you draft the letter that you'll send to your member of Congress. We give you the script that you can modify. So we try to make it as easy for you to do, given on what your capacity is. Um, the second point is for folks who cannot advocate directly because of the job they do, there are other ways they can advocate indirectly. For instance, if they're working in a research organization that has data on homelessness and they're observing a certain pattern that they think their member of Congress need to know that is very local and impactful, they can share that information with advocates who can meet their members of Congress, right? They can also have ideas or have advocate for the cause within their agency, talking to higher up who can advocate with a member of Congress. So there are really multiple ways you can advocate directly or indirectly, supporting those who are already advocating.
That's great. Thank you so much. So I think we can go ahead and I don't see any other questions in the chat. I want to thank everybody for joining today. I really encourage folks to check out the links that have been shared around how to sign up and get involved. As Tamina mentioned, there are so many new resources and tools and opportunities to connect with our team, to get the support, to get the guidance. It can be overwhelming if you've not talked to your members of Congress before, but we are here to support that. At the end of the day, the Alliance cannot do this without you all in the field. Like, your voices are the most important voices and the most important perspectives that Congress needs to hear from, to ensure that you all have the funds in your communities to continue to do the good work that you're doing. So thank you to everybody that was here today. Thank you, Steve, Charles, and Tamina for being with me here today. And take care, everybody.